This is a true event that happened to my friends and I, and has never been shared with the public until now. Even all these years later, the thought of it still creeps me out. But it's important you understand what is possible in the world of witchcraft, and we're not talking Harry Potter. Beware and proceed with caution. You may want to bring along an item of comfort during this spooky story. After high school, I heard stories about a real witch that lived in our town. My dear friend Dan had visited Sybil a few times, and several of us wanted to meet her. Finally, we got the opportunity one winter evening that would change our views about witches forever. Dan told us about Sybil's incredible tea, and that at the end of our visit, if she didn't say, "Blessed be," it was a bad omen. We arrived at Sybil's house, and she invited us in with a smile. She took us into her living room, where she sat in an overstuffed armchair. To her right, facing the picture window, was a long sofa where Dan, Lynn, Mark, and I sat down. But Steve sat alone in a swivel chair across from the sofa, so he could turn to look at us or Sybil. This woman was not at all what I had expected. She was middle-aged and looked, well, normal. Not anything like the Wicked Witch of the West. Sybil told Dan to make tea, and soon we sipped the wonderful iced brew. Today, I wonder exactly what was in her special tea, because things soon turned wicked. After our first glass of the drink, she invited us to her bedroom to hear some music. We all politely followed her. In her bedroom was a record player and a very large waterbed. She flipped a wall switch, and colored lights under the mattress glowed. She instructed us to lie back on the bed, relax, and listen. We did, and soon the sweet music surrounded us. As the song continued, I closed my eyes and floated away with the music. We listened to the lovely Claire de Lune. Until the song oddly ended with the sound of a wolf howling. My friends were unnerved when we headed back into the living room. Much later, they told me there was something odd about Sybil's face, and when the howling started, it changed into that of a wolf. Back on the sofa, we had more tea and sat listening to Sybil. After a time, she made some lewd remarks to Lynn, then me. It was most peculiar and uncomfortable. I'd never heard anyone say such things before, and we were both appalled by the witch's words. She let us know she found us both very attractive, but did it in such a vulgar way. Sybil told Dan to light a candle at the other end of the room. I'd heard about her magic candle routine from other friends, and soon she was talking to the candle. When she moved her index finger up, down, back and forth, the candle flame did the same thing. Somehow, at the time, it felt like amazing magic or a trick. But things abruptly changed. The witch suddenly focused her attention on Steve. He was a tall, dark-haired, handsome guy and very interested in the paranormal and magic. She left the room for a moment and quickly returned carrying a gray garment. She explained in a mysterious way that it was the robe she wore to ceremonies. Sybil had Steve stand up. She helped him put the robe on and pulled the hood down over his face. It looked ominous, and that really bugged me. Then she said an incantation. Steve began moving his arms in a strange way. First, one arm up, then the other. He crossed them and moved his hands and wrists in an unusual manner. It was bizarre, like he'd been transported to another realm. Watching him made me shiver. It was horrifying. And how did he know this ceremony? To my knowledge, Sybil and Steve had never met before. I can still see him in my mind, making those weird, threatening movements. Sybil started explaining what Steve was doing, and near the end, it appeared he had picked up something. Sybil said he had a sword, and Steve held it in both hands above his head. She continued to narrate his movements and said he was going to make a sacrifice with his sword. Then he stabbed the sword down quickly. It startled us all. Steve slid back into the swivel chair as he shook his head. Sybil handed him a multifaceted, ball-shaped crystal. She told him to gaze into it. Next, she asked him what he saw. He spoke as if he was in a trance, and very slowly he described a house, and he was moving up the walkway towards it. He inhaled sharply and dramatically slumped down. His hand fell open, and the crystal, very methodically, rolled across the floor back to Sybil. It was so eerie and like a scene from a frightening movie where the tension was building to something horrific. He put his hand to his face and shook his head. The silence in the room lasted for some time while we all stared at him, then looked at each other, frozen with fear. Steve slipped off the cloak. He was extremely pale and obviously spooked. All I could think about was getting out of there. It was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. The witch had slowly woven a tapestry of terror into us all. Sybil said, "Blessed be," to each of us at the door as we left. In the car, Steve curled up beside me, kissed my hand, and didn't say a word. In fact, we were all unusually silent during the drive and possibly in mild shock. The following days, things went berserk for each of us, and by the end of the week, shockingly, Steve moved in with Sybil. Had she cast a spell on him? Looking back, I now find it spooky and most curious that the song Sybil had played was Claire de Lune, which was also the song Edward Cullen listened to. Yes, the vampire in Twilight. Wonder what influenced that choice of music, plus the howling wolf at the end. Unfortunately, whenever I hear that song, I'm transported back to the night we met Sybil the Witch. Thank you for listening, and please like and subscribe to Paranormal Parlor. Join me for part 2 of this tale as the nightmare with Sybil continues.